It's a cold autumn's Friday morning in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and instead of getting ready to do my usual 40-kilometre commute to work, instead I find myself packing an overnight bag, some camera gear, and some snacks and drinks, ready to take on the 1,001-kilometre journey to Adamstown, New South Wales, a trip that I would spend approximately 10.5 hours doing behind the wheel of Agnetha, the Volvo. Those with a keen attention to detail may have noticed that the usual custom MJP AVS retro plates that would usually be attached to this car appear to have been replaced with some generic combination VIC registration plates. That's because today, the Volvo will be saying goodbye to the rest of the fleet, forever. Oh, I'm gonna miss this thing. G'day everyone, welcome to another episode of Mad Matt's Motoring Mayhem. Now, eventually I'm gonna have to reduce the fleet down to a total of 3 cars. It's something that's been on my mind for months. Having any more than 3 cars is just impractical, and I'd like to be able to do it, but it's stupid, it's frivolous and costing me a fortune. So going down to 3, that makes a difficult choice. But you're probably thinking, alright, well, how hard can it be to choose the best 3 cars out of the fleet and just keep those? It is when you've got as much attachment as I do to all those cars that I have. The main 4 being obviously the Alto Works, the Citroen, this Volvo, and the Audi S5. So with that, the Alto can't go anywhere because that's like one of one pretty much in Australia, and nothing else really comes close to being the uniqueness of it. The amount of money and blood, sweat, tears and effort and everything else I've put into it over the last 2.5 years, I'm not about to part ways with it, I can tell you that. Obviously the Citroen can't go because it's my perfect idea of a track car, especially once it's had the big block and the 6-speed swap. It's just going to be a fantastic little track nugget that I don't think I'll get any more enjoyment out of anything else going around a track than that. So then it comes down to deciding between this Volvo and the S5. Even though this Volvo I thought was going to be the one to hang around for the rest of the time, unfortunately it's the one that's leaving the fleet. But obviously I need to do a little bit of explaining, so that way you don't think I've gone completely and utterly nuts. The S5, which is sort of a kind of misfit in the fleet. It does everything beautifully except to be practical. Straight up, I do not like 2-door coupes. I just think they're impractical, they're kind of showy, they just don't serve much of a purpose really. But everything else in that car in terms of the package, that particular V8, that manual box, the suspension, the brakes, everything about it, the chassis is just incredible. And it drives basically perfectly. Like I think it's a more dailyable car than even this Volvo, besides the impracticality side of things. I've gone on at considerable length before about how I think in terms of a complete package for a car that's factory, this Volvo sort of just does everything. You know, 5-cylinder, turbo, all-wheel drive, manual, in a small sort of station wagon that's really safe and well built. It's pretty hard to top. There's nothing else you can buy with that combination of specs out of the factory these days. It just doesn't happen. But obviously, in terms of what I want out of it, if it's going to be a forever car, I've got to spend some considerable coin on it. And for something that's getting 15, 16 years old now, I'm not sure whether I can justify it. First of all, obviously, I'm going to want to do a built engine if I keep it, and that's going to be upwards of 10 grand with engine management and everything else. And then the brakes aren't really up to scratch, so I'm going to have to do that. The suspension will need changing here and there, you know, adjustable rear control arms and whatever else, and just to get that power where I want it to be. And in terms of getting the chassis to deal with the amount of power that I would want it to have after an engine rebuild, hypothetically, it would cost another probably 5-6 grand on top of that. And I don't know whether I want to spend that sort of money long term on something that's getting a little bit long in the tooth, let's be honest. So unfortunately, it's the one I've chosen to part ways with. Now, it kind of worked out well. I am not going to lie, I'm losing a little bit of money on the thing, considering everything I've spent. I have actually sold it, believe it or not, to a guy in Newcastle, New South Wales, which oddly, is the place that I actually picked this thing up from originally back in November 2022, when it was basically completely stock form. So it's going back to where it came from, which is funny to think that. You're probably thinking, hang on, why are you dropping off to the guy? Shouldn't he fly down to you or whatever and pick it up? Well, yes, but also the car that's replacing this, I'm picking up from a place half an hour from there, so it worked out perfectly. This all came about a lot quicker than I expected, by the way. I expected to get the replacement car much later in the year, on a lookout, once I'd done a few things with this and then sold it. I was going to get the head gasket fixed, but I thought, what's the point of spending money on it and then having to basically get lowballed by someone anyway? I'm just throwing money in the bin. It's not really worth the effort, time and cost. So I've got about just under 6 hours left and about 570 Ks according to Google Maps. We'll get there by 6 o'clock. It's now midday or just over midday. And I'm doing all right for fuel, actually. I've done 435 Ks on this tank, and I've got, I suppose, between a quarter of a tank and half a tank left. So I should make it on 1.5 tanks pretty easily. So I'm going to continue on, enjoy the drive, put on some tunes, chill. It's a Friday and there's really no one on the Hume besides a few trucks here and there. And we'll continue a bit later on. A couple of hours of driving later and it was time for a fuel stop and a quick late lunch in Goulburn, New South Wales. Alright, so I made it to Gundagai, first fuel stop of this whole trip. Gundagai is famous for the big merino, which is this huge concrete sheep. You can see it there in the mirror. It's arse and it's massive, what appears to be concrete ball sack. But anyway, I managed to get 650 Ks on this tank, which is pretty awesome. I don't think I've ever had economy like that before. It says 60 Ks to empty, but I think that's being a little bit overzealous if we're honest. So I'm going to fill up here and get something to eat and then keep going. I think I've got about 400 and something Ks left, so I should get there just after 6 o'clock to Adamstown, which is just outside Newcastle. With the tank brimmed, it was time to grab some lunch for the road. Southern style chicken. Alright, so a bit of a life hack if you're doing some interstate travelling and you like your drinks as ice cold as what I do. So I got my thermal flask. This is a Mighty Car Mods one, actually, interestingly enough. And I chucked some ice in it this morning before I left with some delicious Australian green tea, one of my favourite drinks. But because the ice is now melted, it's not cold anymore. So all you got to do is just buy one of these urban iced coffee things, but without any of the coffee thing in it, and just use the ice. So chuck that straight in there, and then chuck my fresh bottle of Australian green tea in there, and let that get nice and cool. And I've got some nice cold green tea for the next however many hours left of this trip. I think it's like 4 and a bit hours. Yeah, and that's good to go. But in the interim, I get to enjoy my complimentary normal hot coffee. Why does coffee always taste the best when it's free? Funny that. After another couple of laborious hours of Hume Highway commuting and seeing this cool K-truck. Yeah, the K-truck. I eventually hit some inevitable peak hour traffic just west of Sydney. Bloody hell. I knew the clear run had to end at some point, and it has. 8 hours of driving, and now I've hit Sydney peak hour traffic on the M7 toll road. So you pay this money for a toll road, and this is what you've got to sit in, unfortunately. But it's no different than Melbourne, I guess, is it? Either way, my ETA is now jumped up from 6:25, I think it was, when I left Goulburn, to now 6:35. Which is, you know, not convenient, but it is what it is. Luckily though, this was short-lived. So some good news, the traffic is flowing a lot better than I expected in this bit where it says it's completely red on Google Maps. I'm doing 60 Ks an hour continuously, so ETA's gone back down to 6:27. Hooray! It's always fantastic when traffic ends up being better than you think it's going to be. Soon enough, I was in the 9-kilometre long North Connex tunnel for the first time ever, and even though the Volvo's coolant temperatures didn't like it, it looked a hell of a lot nicer than what Melbourne's tunnels do. This looks sick! Eventually, my ETA reduced from hours down to minutes. Less than an hour left. Oh yeah, home stretch. And my patience by this point was wearing a little thin. Honestly, if there's one significant point that stands out with doing interstate trips, is that they would be so much more pleasurable if everyone just did their friggin' speed limit. Like, I don't understand why you have to go down a hill and then brake down a hill and then go 15 k's under the speed limit. Like, why would you do that? It just slows everyone down and just pisses people off, like myself. After having this slight meltdown over the driving habits of New South Wales motorists, I finally arrived in Adamstown and rendezvoused with the new owner of the Volvo just outside Adamstown station. Oh yeah, John. Good to finally meet you, mate.
That is.
Yeah, it is.
Super easy.
And after a brief spirited test drive, it was time to say goodbye.
I will look at the end of the day, like if they turn around and go close door, I don't reckon they will.
No, it honestly presents pretty well, and in the photos it came up that damn good. You're like, where's the paint problems, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, roof, bonnet, mirrors, and then thing at the back, and then you're pretty much sweet.
Too easy.
But yeah,
cool.
Enjoy it, man.
Yeah, well,
take care of
man.
it. It's been awesome.
Yeah, good luck with your new fun.
Yeah, I will. Yeah,
cool.
I'm looking forward to that, I tell you. So
awesome.
Fun starts very soon.
All right.
No worries. Thanks a lot, John.
Have a good one.
Safe drive back.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye, Agnetha. A little bit sad, not gonna lie. With the Volvo now being completely gone from my possession, it was time to check into the motel, relax, and get some late night dinner. Hotel beds aren't fantastic, but I tell you what, after sitting in a car for 10.5 hours, it's not bad at all. However, there was a bit of an elephant in the room that needed to be addressed. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, hang on a second, Matt. If you're trying to reduce the number of cars in the fleet, then why are you going tomorrow morning to pick up a car that's going to replace the Volvo that you just sold for the whole point of reducing the number of cars in the fleet? That's a very good question. That will be answered tomorrow. Also, Singapore noodles at 10 o'clock at night hits different. Alright, so it's Saturday morning. Just checked out of the hotel a few minutes ago. Had a very well-deserved sleep after 10 hours of pretty much straight driving. Feeling a hell of a lot better, I can tell you that. And I noticed on Google Maps there's a 7-Eleven around the corner from where the hotel is, so I'm going to grab some snacks and some drinks for the next 10.5 hour drive that awaits me after I get an Uber after this and then go to the dealership where the new Daily awaits. Alright, Uber has been booked. I'm going in a RAV4 apparently. Just got dropped off to the dealership and there it is! Oh my god! Oh man, it's so clean. This is very, very exciting. And no sunroof either. It's exactly the way I want it. It's got the good tail lights. Oh man, this is sick. The sales guy I'd been dealing with was serving other customers, so this worked well as a good time to scoff down some last minute breakfast. 10 minutes or so later though, the paperwork was signed, I'd gotten the keys, the car was packed, and it was time to hit the road. Happy days. Alright, we're good to go.
Let's get rid of the lease paperwork for you.
That's it. No worries. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Not a problem.
Appreciate it, man. I'll be leaving you a top review for sure, man.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Give me a call, let me know.
Will do. Catch you, mate. Cheers. The car came with about a quarter of a tank of fuel, and obviously that wasn't going to get me very far, but fortunately there was a servo right outside the dealership. That's a lot better than the nearly $2.40 I paid yesterday. Unfortunately, doing a tyre pressure check wasn't going to happen. Well, I can't check my tyre pressures because there's no hose on that pump, so that's not going to work, is it? Alright, so full tank of fuel, reset the trip computer. I've got my Invery Bluetooth adapter thing plugged in, so that's handy. I took that straight out of the S5 and plugged it into this, so that way I've got Bluetooth streaming, which it is now. Got my drink bottle all sorted. Good to go. We've got 995 kilometers back to Melbourne. ETA is 7:47, but I reckon I can do it quicker than that, even just by sticking to legal speed limits like I did yesterday. So time to hit it. That's right, for the replacement daily I've gone back to my roots. This is Inga, a 2011 B8 generation Audi A4 Quattro S-Line Avant, and for you non-Audi files watching, Avant is Audi's code name for the more familiar estate or station wagon. Several years ago I actually had one of these late model B8 A4 Quattros, and I absolutely loved almost everything about it, but lifestyle changes and work demands at the time meant that a sedan really wasn't sufficing for my needs, and unfortunately I parted ways with it. Now with having one in wagon form, this fulfills those demands as the perfect platform for a daily. It also has no sunroof, which I love, as all sunroofs ever seem to do is add weight, reduce structural rigidity and interior headroom, and serve as another thing to go wrong at some point. Being an S-Line package means that amongst other things, it has a nicer spec interior and just as many if not more creature comforts than my S5 does, including keyless entry door sensors which actually work. This particular example has the commonly used VW Group 2-litre FSI turbo engine, which is basically a slightly less spicy version of what you'd find in a Mark 6 Golf GTI, albeit facing a different direction. These engines were notorious for having major oil consumption issues, and this one is no exception. However, it had a full engine rebuild done whilst in the previous owner's possession, as a gesture of goodwill from Audi customer care at a cost of nearly 10 grand. It also has the 7-speed DSG gearbox, which obviously shifts really quick, but doesn't do it really for me compared to my manual gearboxes. The nearly 1,000 kilometre trip back home began, and it didn't take me too long to figure out why I'd gone back to one of these B8 generation Audis. Alright, so I'm about 2.5 hours into the drive back to Melbourne already. I've got just over 7 hours left and I think about 750 k's or thereabouts. And honestly, I'm blown away with just how amazingly this A4 drives. It's got 175,000 k's on it, but if you put a bit of sticky tape over the odometer and told me it had 10 or 20,000 k's, I'd probably believe it, because it dead set drives like a brand new car. It's just so incredibly refined and comfortable and quiet and tight, which is what I've come to expect from these B8 chassis Audis. It honestly just feels like I'm driving a slightly more refined, not V8 version of the S5 that's got 4 doors and some proper practicality to it. As I continued driving deeper into country New South Wales, the clouds overhead started to roll in, and the constant freeway pace was interrupted by a familiar enemy. Nothing to harsh my buzz on a nice long cruisy drive interstate than having roadworks and being at 60 k's an hour on a 110k freeway. Before I knew it, I was 400 kilometers into the journey, but a fuel stop really wasn't necessary at this point. Honestly, I still haven't used half a tank, so I don't really need to stop for fuel, but I might as well because it's nearly 2 o'clock and I haven't had lunch and I'm getting kind of hungry. So I just had a look on Google Maps and yeah, the nearest servo is I think Ampol in Yass, or Yass, however the friggin' hell you say it. So I'm gonna stop there and probably put half a tank in, which is all it needs, and not even, and get something to eat and then continue onwards. Alright, stopped in at Ampol Fruitery in Yass, and I've done very, very good for fuel economy, I can tell you that. Only used not even half a tank, and I've done 450 k's, which is pretty damn outstanding. So I'll top this one up, get some food, and keep moving. Alright, tank is brimmed. I've apparently got 780 k's to empty according to the trip computer. Chicken Caesar wrap and a low carb cookies and cream bar, so I'm good to go. Haven't actually really tested what the performance is like with this thing yet, not that I really care too much because, well, for reasons I'll get into a little bit later, but let's have a look. So freeway on ramp, put it in second. Oh yeah, just goes alright. Pretty joyless engines though, like, to be honest, like a combination of this and a DSG, it's just like, kind of does the job, but it's nothing exciting. The monotonous and desolate roads following the fuel and lunch stop gave me time to reflect on the outgoing Volvo and my reason behind replacing it with this Audi. I can pretty confidently say that as a car that has that set of specifications, i.e. 5-cylinder turbo, all-wheel drive, manual and a station wagon, it's pretty hard to beat. There's nothing, in terms of my taste in cars, there's really nothing else from factory that you can get that does everything as well as that. However, why should I have to deal with something that's only ever available in a factory configuration? What if I wanted to push the envelope a bit? effectively what I've got here with this A4 wagon is my perfect idea of a daily. Everything about it is fantastic. I mean, I like the creature comforts, I like the interior fit and finish and the design, I like the outside styling, I like the practicality of it, the suspension setup's great, everything about it's fantastic. I just don't really care too much for the drivetrain. I don't particularly like the 2-litre turbo engine, and I don't really like the 7-speed DSG gearbox. I'm not a huge fan of it. On the flip side, I've got the S5, where everything about it is fantastic dynamically. The engine and the gearbox combination, that particular low-stress V8, not the RS type V8, and that 6-speed manual box, with that 4-wheel drive system, and the brakes and the suspension and everything about it, it's about as good as it gets dynamically. I don't think I've had anything in terms of an all-round package to drive that's better than that. But I don't like the styling of it. I don't like the coupe shell that it effectively is housed in. I think coupes are just impractical. I think they're kind of douchey. It's a bit too wide. It's just not for me. So, how about if I was to mate the two of them together? Some of you may remember from my last episode, I said this about the S5.
Look, it's going to hang around, but it's not going to completely hang around. Again, I can't go into details, but you'll see later on what the plan is for that thing.
Well, this is what I meant by that. From the factory, both of these cars are built on the same MLB pre-facelift B8 chassis as one another and virtually identical underneath, besides the driveline. So with that said, the plan is to rip out the fantastic non-RS 4.2 litre direct injection V8, 6-speed manual gearbox, the bigger brakes, Vogel and coilovers, 034 Motorsport adjustable upper front control arms, instrument cluster, front seats and a bunch of other things from the S5, and transplant them into the much more dailyable A4 wagon. The end goal being to take the best of both of these Audis and Frankenstein them into one, thus reducing the total number of cars in the fleet and making my dream spec all-round wagon a reality. Before I knew it, the trip was coming to an end, and the rapidly setting sun just made the autumn horizon become more and more serene. How's that for a sunset to end my day, huh? My God, that is very pretty. Home at last. That was a long, cumulative 20 hours, I tell you, or close enough. I pulled in the driveway at 7:40 p.m. and I left Newcastle pretty much right on 10 a.m. this morning, which means it took me only 9 hours and 40 minutes to do 995 Ks. So I'm pretty happy with that. I've heard people taking nearly 10 hours just to get to Sydney, and that's 2 hours south of where I was. So, I don't know, maybe they're just taking unnecessary breaks or something. Either way, I'm glad to be home, and I'm good to retire for the night. Surely though, you might ask, wouldn't it have just been easy to keep the Volvo, sort out the head gasket and squeeze more power out of that 5-cylinder turbo than you'd ever get out of this small Atmo German V8? And in any case, Audi already has an all-wheel drive V8 powered RS4 wagon spanning 2 generations, so why not just buy one of those? To explain all this, I thought it would be best to hop in the pending sacrificial lamb of an S5 and go for a drive. First of all, there's that seemingly never-ending argument about the whole smaller displacement turbocharged engine versus larger displacement NA, like this S5 for instance. I like both. Obviously I've had turbo cars, I've had NA cars. I've grown up with NA V8, so of course I'm going to be a little bit more biased towards them. But realistically, when you've had something like one of these Audi V8s, you know, they're not the most powerful engines in the world, but the response and just the way that they absolutely love to rev, like just... And the torque, like for a smaller displacement V8, they've just got bucket loads, even from nothing. And that's the other thing I love too. As something to live with every day, I'd prefer that over something that's got a smaller, say for example, 5-cylinder with a turbo on it. Yeah, they make cool noises and everything like that. The thing about 5-cylinder engines is, yeah, they sound good when you're on them. They sound really good actually. But when you're not giving it to it, they don't sound like much, but these sound good even just cruising up a hill at 1500 RPM in 6 like I'm doing now. And mind you, I couldn't do that in something like the Volvo. It would just be like, it'd just be wanting to go back another gear or two just to, you know, get in that torque band where the turbo is actually doing something at that point. This, just nothing. You just 60 k's an hour, 1500 RPM, and just give it some, and it just pulls. That's exactly what you want. And look, if we're talking about the head gasket in that thing, I've had 40 something cars in my life, all of which I've absolutely flogged on a daily basis. Never once blew a head gasket. Never once had head gasket issues. Never. Even when I had a bug-eye Subaru WRX wagon about 5 years ago that I dailied for about 6 months. I mean, that thing, you know, old Subaru turbos, especially like an EJ205, like what's in that, they're notorious for doing head gaskets. That's where the whole head gasket meme came from. And not even that thing had any head gasket problems. And then the one car that I do, which is the Volvo, does. I spent so much time and effort and money to get to the bottom of the cooling system in that car, and after all that work, over a year, if not more, ended up being a head gasket all along. And I don't know, just for me, it was sort of just the nail in the coffin, really. I was just like, well, I can't be bothered with this anymore. This is just, what else is going to go wrong? I'd be completely worried taking that thing on a track, and I did take it on a track once, and yeah, it absolutely cooked its head off. Whereas this, I took this to Broadford on a mid 30 degree day and absolutely flogged it for 16 laps. Coolant temps were fine, oil temps were perfect, you know. It just loves it. It's just it's that simplicity with NA-V8s that I just love. It's just power there when you want it. There you go, second, put my foot down now, power, instant. You can't get that out of a turbo car, you just can't. Yes, I know you can get more power out of a 5-cylinder turbo, but honestly, as a daily drive that occasionally goes to the track and then does the more than occasional spirited hill run, why would I need anything more than this? It has enough poke, it really does. It's such a fantastic chassis as well, like the way just with these Vogelin coilovers in it and these Henkel RS4 tyres, it just absolutely demolishes corners. Like, I'm used to Audis. Audis generally have that reputation of not being the greatest handling cars in the world and not having a lot of steering feel. With the B8 chassis, like what this is built on, they really got that right. Like, the steering is miles better than the earlier B5, B6, B7 stuff. And then there is that question of, all right, well, why wouldn't you just buy a B8.5 or a B7 RS4 wagon? Well, we'll cover the B7 first. They're not cheap to begin with. I mean, to get a wagon one of those, you're looking at upwards of high 40s to low 50s minimum to get one. I'm not prepared to spend that on a car that's been out for 18 years. They're getting a bit long in the tooth as well. I mean, to get parts for a B7 is not the easiest thing anymore, comparatively with B8s, because B8s obviously are quite a bit newer and they ran over a longer period of time, and there's just more of them, I guess. So to get interior pieces and whatever else is just, it's an easier effort. I also don't want to pay RS tax on things. I mean, if you've got either a B7 or a B8.5 RS4, just to do front brakes is like a $2,500–3,000 job minimum, you know. I don't want to be spending that. The brakes on this S5 I can get for basically like $1,000 all up for all 4 corners. It's not that expensive for what it is, really. The other thing with a B8.5 is, because it is an 8.5 and not just a B8 like what this is, B8.5, they went to electromechanical steering. And look, Audi's always struggled with steering feel, even with just hydraulic steering. So if you factor electric steering into that, it's really not great. I really love the feel of the hydraulic steering on these B8s, and I don't want to let go of that. Steering feel for me is a really important thing, and it is basically for anyone that's doing track days or they're doing spirited runs pretty frequently. So I don't want to go to something that's electromechanical, and by all accounts, anyone I know who has got a B8.5 Audi, the first thing they complain about is, yeah, the steering's okay, it's hard to get right, you can have selectable modes. I don't want any of that. I just want something I can get in it and just go. I don't want to have to muck around with steering response and feel and put it in dynamic mode or whatever that crap is. I'm not interested in that. I'm really not. So the steering really is a big thing for me. The other thing too with a B8.5 is you can only get them in DSG. They never made those in a manual, ever. So the DSG obviously weighs more. I don't think it's fun. And look, there's the whole argument about, you know, DSG versus manual, and yeah, I appreciate that in a straight line they're quicker at the drags. You know, that having the gear changes that quick is, of course, it's going to save you time. But I just love the feel of just throwing a manual box, just being able to rev match when I want, and just change like that. It's awesome. The first thing people say to me when they see this car is, "Oh my God, it's a manual! I didn't even know they made them in manual." I'm like, yeah, well, they did. It's just it's such a rare thing these days to see this stick thing in the middle. that people are just like, oh, wow. It's a surprise when there is one. And I like that. So yeah, of course, it's not going to be the easiest thing to do this swap, and in terms of my mechanical ability to pull it off, I definitely don't have it. Fortunately, one of my good mates, who is also incidentally called Matt and is even crazier than I am, he's put a B7 RS4 V8 into a B6 S4 wagon, which I believe is maybe one of only 2 in the world that has that. He's a doctorate of engineering, and he knows so much about wiring and the little intricacies that you need to know when you're trying to pull off a swap that's this big. And I actually said to him a little while back, I'm like, hey Matt, hypothetically, if I wanted to get an A4 B8 S-Line wagon and put the driveline from the S5 into it, would that be difficult to do? And hoping that he was going to say yes, it would be, so that way I wouldn't have to go down this whole rabbit hole. And he's like, nah man, that would be easy. He goes, it's B8 to B8, everything would work. I'm like, oh no, here we go. A few weeks ago, I actually spent probably a good few hours over his place on a Sunday night going through all the parts catalogs between this and the A4 that I've bought, just to check compatibility with certain things. And yeah, it's looking like it might actually be a relatively easy thing to do. Obviously there is going to be difficulties with it. I think first of all, coding with the modules to get that ECU talking to the car. There's also the thing of the wheelbase between the 2 cars being different, slightly, like 5 centimeters or something, but it means that the drive shaft's going to have to be probably augmented, as well as the exhaust is going to have to be changed as well, and little things like that. But it's not a process we're expecting to be quick, but if we pull it off, and we will, it's going to be one hell of a car. And it is honestly something I've dreamt about for years. I've always wanted to get this particular manual V8 driveline of this S5 into something more practical. The only reason I bought this car to begin with is because it's the last manual V8 Audi you can get. It kind of makes me a little bit sad that Audi didn't really offer that as a driveline after like 2011 or 2012. They went to instead the supercharged V6, and yeah, I know you can get heaps more power out of those, but it's no manual Audi V8. It's like that old saying goes, and this is very controversial, but there is just no replacement for displacement. It's as simple as that. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.